It started with a cough. A little later, a fever. Within days, blackened, oozing boils began to spread across the body as if some sort of necrosis were clawing its way, birthed by death itself from the innermost being. Of course, the victim's body developed a crinkly and dark hue, its life withering. Their voices of lamentation trembling in the streets had no promise of shelter, only the certainty of the grave. No one knew whence it came. No one knew how to stop it. One thing was for sure. It was inescapable. The year 1347 had eyed Europe. The Black Death had unfolded. A killer, moving silently through the streets, struck by surprise. With nowhere to turn, people turned to their doctors, priests, and kings. No one could save them. In fear, they tried everything, remedies born out of frenzy, superstition, and madness. And in the end, those so-called cures became as fiendish as the plague. This is a tale of how medieval people coped with and attempted to cure the Black Death. During the medieval times, diseases were not mysteries to doctors, but rather were construed to be about balance. It was assumed that the human body was under the rule of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And whenever any of the mentioned was in excess, it soon led to disease. The cure would be to remove the excess. Thus, sickness was cut away from the sick. The instruments of bloodletting could be very sharp knives or, worse, rusted ones that slit open veins to let out the so-called ill blood, or leeches applied to the skin for the sake of draining away the dying. The more blood they lost, the weaker they became, until, one by one, they fell into the grave. They moved around like shadows, clad in black robes, their faces covered with masks resembling raven beaks. They were none other than the spreaders of plague. Their masks were stuffed with herbs rosemary, lavender, juniper as protection against poisonous air that was then thought to cause death. They carried sticks to prod the bedridden. No one got close for fear of infection. No bare hands to touch any of them. But as odd as they were covered, they were simply powerless. They witnessed unpleasantly as the dying decayed right into their eyes. If the plague was a chastisement from God, only by suffering could one hope for salvation. They marched in long processions across villages, their robes stained with blood, their backs laying open from their own swollen, fiery strikes. The flagellants. They were convinced that through painful self-infliction they could atone for mankind's sins, driving the plague away. Yet such took place as their processional journeys through town after town, chanting prayers and whipping themselves raw. A few carried something else. The very plague itself. Instead of serving as a cure for the sick, they become death's messengers, spreading the disease with every step. In times when fear creeps in, logic fades. In their last ditch for answers, they sought one to blame. Witches, they cried. The heretics, the outsiders, the ones who whispered to the dark. Found in their homes, an accusation was laid against the women that they had cast spells that brought the plague to the world. They burned them alive, their screams drowned in the flames. Then turning to the Jewish community, they accused them of poisoning the wells. Hundreds, thousands were killed in the name of stopping the plague. The plague, however, did not care. It did not choose its victims. It simply devoured and moved on. Some turned to methods even stranger. They took a live, plucked chicken in their arms and rubbed all the swollen and rotting boils, believing the chicken would draw out the poison. They drank crushed emeralds so that the magical force of the stones would purify their blood. Others coated their bodies with human manure, convinced that the stench would scare off the disease. They would try anything, but in their madness, death only grinned. Yet from the madness, some wisdom was derived. They saw the arrival of the ships, whence the crew was already softening inside, and thus they resolved a new statute. The ships were to wait in harbor for 40 days, a quarantine. Those within the city shut themselves away, avoiding the sick, burning the bodies before they could infect others. It was the first time in history that man had fought the plague not with blood, not with fire, but with knowledge. So, the Black Death moved into the annals of history. By the time it had passed away, it had taken away the very lives of 200 million. Entire cities had been wiped away. Kingdoms fell apart. The world had changed for good. And yet the plague had never vanished completely. It still lurked in the shadows, waiting, lurking for a new ship to sail, a new rat to scurry a fresh breath to be inhaled. Perhaps even now, it is watching, a whisper. And on the day when it is ready, it will come back. Which medieval cure left you with the most terror? Leave us a comment below. If you enjoyed traveling through history's darkest moments, like and subscribe and get ready for further stories through time. For history never ceased to exist, it waited to be discovered once again.